Kantian theory. So we already discussed about Kantian theory, but I will just rediscuss. So we have here, uh, again, right and wrong is determined by rationality, giving universal duties, a non-consequentialist moral theory, that there is a supreme principle of morality. Good and evil are defined in terms of law, duty, obligation. So again, rationality and freedom are also central. So we have here, you ought to do your duty simply because it is your duty. So again, submission to one's duty is not due to external demands imposed upon you, but due to your internal decision made by us a person itself. So for Kant, he thought that acting morally was quite simple. So we have here reason guides you. Goodwill is the only thing that is good without qualification. So actions are truly moral only if they have the right intention. Again, what establishes goodwill only can be a law of universal conformity. Like, I should never act except in such a way that I can also will that my maxim should become a universal. We have here categorical imperative, principle of universalizability. And again, he believed that because the categorical imperative is our guide to moral action, he considers this as a voice of duty and considers it definite. So again, the basic idea is that we should adapt as um, action guiding rules. Only those can be universally accepted. Again, for this example, I can break promises when keeping them becomes inconvenient. Like, uh, can this be universalized? So, of course, for Kant, for him, it is a no because making promises then becomes, in essence, contradictory. The thinking is that a promise is, again, by definition, something you keep. But on this um, above maxim would lead to a contradiction of it. So we have here again, never treat anyone merely as a means to an end, rather treat everyone as an end in themselves. So noting an example, the slave society, what is wrong with the slave society is that a slave is treated as a means to the owner's ends, as an instrument or tool, not as a person. The upshot is that no person's interest can be overridden by another's or the majority. So many think that this way of formulating the categorical imperative shows that Kantianism is clearly anti-utilitarian. Some things to ask about Kantianism, like what I have read from your essays, like it is true that having good intentions is the only thing that counts morally. Must we always ignore good consequences, or is it always wrong to treat people merely as a means to an end, or can we do otherwise? So, rights based theories of Kant, we are to act in accordance with a set of moral rights which we possess simply by being human. So, right based views are connected to Kantianism, non consequentialist, that if someone has a right, then others have a corresponding duty to provide what the right requires. Use distinguish between positive and negative rights. So, Of course, this positive right is one in which the corresponding duty requires positive action, like giving donation in order to sustain someone's education, etc. Like the while the negative right is one in which, or it merely requires refraining from doing something that will harm someone. So some things to ask about rights-based theories. Where do rights come from? From nature, from principles of justice, or from utilitarian procedures? How do we decide between competing rights? Then we move on to utilitarianism, the greatest good of the greatest number. So for utilitarianism, moral act again is the one that produces the greatest amount of happiness with everyone considering. So we have here the proponents, Jeremy Bentham's principle of utility. So here he recognizes the fundamental role of pain and pleasure in human life, approves, disapproves of action on the basis of the amount of pain or pleasure brought about, consequences, equates good with pleasure and evil with pain, and lastly asserts that pleasure and pain are capable of quantification and hence measurable. So for Bentham, he states that actions are good insofar as they tend to promote happiness. The concern of utilitarianism is the well-being of others and of the whole society. Although it considers pleasure as the basis of goodness, it does not follow however, the whole concept of pleasure, because in other concept of pleasure, they disregard the society as the basis of doing good deeds. And those who follow utilitarianism, they they discard, um, they remove religious traditions and social conventions. So, in bearing this principle of utility in our minds, we should consider the possible effects of each action or moral decision. We are to choose the action among the many other possible ones. And for it not to have a hint of subjectivism, so those who follow, they added the principle of greatest number and equity. So another under Bentham is the pleasure pain calculus or hedonistic calculus. So in measuring pleasure and pain, he introduces these following criteria: intensity, duration, certainty, and its nearness. He also includes its fecundity and its purity. In considering actions that affect numbers of people, we must also account for its extent. So, in this hedonistic calculus, an action is to be considered good or moral if it is more intense. Accordingly, dito or here, the longer the happiness of a particular action lasts, the better. The more certain, the sure we are that happiness will happen. The nearer, the better, the greater chance of possibility that it will be followed by more pleasure, the better the action will be. The purer the pleasure, the better. And again, the greater number of people benefited, the number the action will be. Next, a follower of Jerry Bentham, but he disagreed with the hedonistic calculus. He adjusted the more hedonistic tendencies in Bentham's by emphasizing it is not the quantity but the quality of happiness. Calculus is unreasonable. Qualities cannot be quantified, and utilitarianism refers to the greatest happiness principle. It seeks to promote the capability of achieving happiness for the most amount of people. Because for Mill, he believed that it is impossible to calculate the amount of pleasure and pain in certain action. Like there are no means by which a person will be able to determine which is more intense between pleasurable sensations. So, act and rule utilitarianism. The aim of this two is to maximize overall happiness, but the approach to the problem will be from different angles. We have here, we can apply the principle of utility to either particular actions or general rules. Particular actions, act utilitarianism, rule utilitarianism is the general rules. So for act, utilitarianism or from Bentham's is applied directly to each alternative act in a situation of choice. The right act is then defined as the one which brings about the best results. So, for act utilitarianism, the rightness of an act is determined by its effect on the general happiness. It should be applied to particular acts in particular situation on a case-to-case basis. Again, the focus considers the consequences of individual actions. For example, you are deciding whether to lie to protect your friend's feelings. So, under act utilitarianism, you consider whether the specific lie in this particular situation produces more overall happiness than telling the truth. So the moral worth of an action is again assessed case by case. Then the criticisms of this viewpoint to the difficulty of attaining full knowledge and certainty of the consequences of our actions. So it is possible to justify immoral acts using utilitarianism. While rule utilitarianism determine the validity of rules of conduct. A rule like promise keeping is established by looking at the consequences of a world in which people broke promises at will and a world in which promises were binding. So, in rule utilitarianism, people must evaluate the moral correctness of an action not with its impact on the general happiness, but with respect to the impact on the rule that the action embodies. Again, the focus consider the consequences of following general rules. An act is morally right if it conforms to a rule that, if followed consistently, produces the greatest overall happiness. Yeah. In the same situation, deciding whether to lie. So, under rule utilitarianism, you will consider whether a general rule like always tell the truth generally produces the best outcomes if everyone followed it. So, these theories from the past theories provide different perspectives on what constitutes moral behavior and how ethical decisions should be made. Each theory has has its own strengths and challenges, so offering unique insights into the complexities of morality. So it is really up to us what we believed, what moral theory aligns with us, or it might be from case to case basis.